My husband insisted on taking my car for a safety check before my trip. I dropped my keys and spotted a tracker hidden under the bumper. I didn't say a word. I quietly moved it to a police cruiser parked nearby. That night, I got a strange call. "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. My husband insisted on taking my car for a safety check before my trip to Portland. I should have known something was wrong when Damon offered to help without me asking. In 37 years of marriage, he'd never been the type to fuss over car maintenance, especially not mine. You know how I worry about you driving all that way alone," he said, his weathered hands already reaching for my keys from the kitchen counter. The way he said it made my skin crawl, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Maybe it was the tone, too sweet, like he was talking to a child instead of his 61-year-old wife. I watched him through the kitchen window as he popped the hood of my blue Honda Civic. His movements were deliberate, methodical. Damon had always been good with his hands. 40 years as a mechanic would do that to a man. But something about the way he was working under there seemed different. Secretive. The morning sun caught the gray in his hair as he bent lower, disappearing from view. I turned back to my coffee, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my chest like a weight. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe retirement had given me too much time to overthink every little thing. "All done," he announced 20 minutes later, wiping his hands on an old rag. "She's running like a dream. You should have a smooth ride to Emma's." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Thank you, honey. I appreciate you looking out for me." But as I gathered my purse and overnight bag, something nagged at me. Damon had been different lately. More attentive, more concerned about my whereabouts. He'd started asking detailed questions about my book club meetings, my grocery shopping trips, even my walks around the neighborhood. When I mentioned it, he'd brush it off with that same patronizing tone. "I just worry about you, Marianne. Is that such a crime?" The drive to Portland should have taken 6 hours, but I decided to stop for lunch in Salem. As I pulled into the parking lot of a small diner, my keys slipped from my fingers and clattered to the asphalt. I bent to retrieve them, and that's when I saw it. A small black device, no bigger than a matchbox, attached to the underside of my rear bumper. My heart stopped. I crouched there in the parking lot, staring at the thing, my mind racing to make sense of what I was seeing. It looked professional, expensive, not something that would accidentally end up on my car. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. My first instinct was to rip it off, to confront Damon immediately. But something held me back. A voice in my head, quiet but insistent, told me to be smart about this. If my husband was tracking me, I needed to know why. I walked into the diner on unsteady legs and ordered coffee I couldn't taste. My phone buzzed with a text from Damon. "How's the drive going? Let me know when you get there safely." The irony wasn't lost on me. He already knew exactly where I was. I sat there for an hour, my mind spinning. How long had he been watching me? Weeks? Months? Years? I thought about all the times he'd seemed to know things he shouldn't know. Like when I'd stopped by the pharmacy when I hadn't mentioned going there. Or when he'd asked about my conversation with my neighbor Betty when I was certain he hadn't been home. When I finally got back to my car, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of removing the device, I carefully detached it and looked around the parking lot. A police cruiser sat at the far end, the officer inside filling out paperwork. My hands trembling, I walked over and quickly attached the tracker to the underside of the police car's bumper. If Damon wanted to track someone, let him track the local sheriff's department. I drove the rest of the way to Portland in a daze. Emma greeted me with her usual warm hug, but I must have looked terrible because her expression immediately shifted to concern. "Mom, are you okay? You look pale." I wanted to tell her everything. I wanted to collapse into my daughter's arms and explain that I'd just discovered my husband had been spying on me. But the words wouldn't come. How do you tell your 33-year-old daughter that her stepfather, the man who'd helped raise her since she was a toddler, might not be the person any of us thought he was? I'm just tired from the drive, I lied, settling into her comfortable living room. You know how that highway can be. That evening, as Emma and I were cleaning up after dinner, my phone rang. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Henderson? The voice was professional, crisp. This is Marianne Holloway, I corrected automatically. There was a pause. I apologize. I'm looking for Marianne Henderson. I was given this number by a mutual friend. Something about the way he said mutual friend made my blood run cold. I think you have the wrong number. Wait, the man said quickly. You drive a blue Honda Civic, license plate 7RF9847? I nearly dropped the phone. Who is this? Ma'am, I think we need to talk. Can you meet me tomorrow at the Starbucks on Morrison Street, 10 in the morning? I don't understand. What is this about? It's about your husband, Mrs. Holloway, and what he's been paying me to do. The line went dead. I stood there in Emma's kitchen, the phone still pressed to my ear, my heart hammering so hard I was sure she could hear it from the dining room. The voice on the phone knew things about me that only Damon should know. My license plate number. The fact that I drove a blue Honda. And somehow, he knew my maiden name, Henderson, which I hadn't used in 37 years. Emma appeared in the doorway, a dish towel in her hands. Mom? Who was that? I looked at my daughter's concerned face, at the life she'd built for herself in this bright, airy apartment, at the photos on her refrigerator showing her and her boyfriend hiking and laughing and living the kind of carefree life I couldn't remember ever having, and I made another decision that would change everything. Wrong number, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. Just someone looking for directions. But as I lay awake in Emma's guest room that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the unfamiliar sounds of her neighborhood, I knew I was going to that Starbucks. I needed answers. I needed to understand what my husband had done and why. Because somewhere in the back of my mind, a terrible possibility was taking shape. Maybe the tracker wasn't the only way Damon had been watching me. Maybe there were other things, other signs I'd missed or explained away. Maybe my marriage, my entire life, had been built on lies I was only now beginning to see. The thought terrified me. But it also lit something inside me that had been dormant for too long. For the first time in years, maybe decades, I was going to find out the truth. No matter how much it hurt. The Starbucks on Morrison Street buzzed with the usual morning crowd, but I barely noticed the noise around me. I'd been sitting in the corner booth for 15 minutes, nursing a coffee that had long gone cold, when a man in his 40s approached my table. Mrs. Holloway? He was Asian, well-dressed in a way that spoke of professionalism rather than wealth. I'm Mike Chen. Thank you for coming. I gestured to the seat across from me, my throat too tight to speak. This was really happening. I was about to learn things about my husband that I wasn't sure I was ready to hear. Mike Chen sat down and immediately pulled out a manila folder. I want to start by saying I'm sorry. What I've been doing. It's legal, but it doesn't sit right with me. That's why I'm here. What exactly have you been doing? The words came out as a whisper. Your husband hired me 6 months ago to conduct surveillance on you. He told me you'd been acting strangely, that he was concerned about your mental state. He said he needed documentation of your daily activities for your own safety. 6 months. I gripped my coffee cup tighter, trying to process the timeline. What kind of documentation? Mike opened the folder and slid several photographs across the table. There I was, coming out of the grocery store, walking into my book club at the library, sitting on a bench at Riverside Park, feeding the ducks, all taken from a distance, all without my knowledge. GPS tracking, photographic surveillance, and... He hesitated. Monitoring of your digital communications. My phone? And your computer. He had me install software that would give him access to your emails, text messages, browsing history. The room seemed to tilt around me. I thought about all the times my phone had acted strangely lately, how it would freeze during important calls or how certain apps would close unexpectedly. I'd chalked it up to having an older model, but now... "Why are you telling me this?" I managed to ask. Mike leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Because what started as a concern for your welfare has turned into something else entirely. Your husband isn't just monitoring you, Mrs. Holloway. He's building a case. A case for what? Incompetency. He's been documenting every small mistake, every moment of confusion, every time you forget something minor. He's been creating a narrative that you're suffering from early-stage dementia." The words hit me like a physical blow. I thought about the times recently when I'd questioned my own memory, car keys that weren't where I'd left them, appointments I could have sworn I'd written down but couldn't find in my calendar. Small things, easily explained, but they'd made me doubt myself. "But I'm not," I said firmly. "There's nothing wrong with my mind." "I know," Mike said quietly. "That's the problem. I've been watching you for 6 months, Mrs. Holloway. You're sharp, organized, completely competent. Whatever your husband is planning, it has nothing to do with your actual mental state." I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. "What does he want?" Mike hesitated. "I think he wants control. Of your finances, your decisions, maybe even your freedom. If he can prove you're incompetent to make your own choices." He didn't need to finish the sentence. I understood. In our state, if someone could demonstrate that their spouse was mentally incapacitated, they could gain legal guardianship, control over bank accounts, medical decisions, where that person lived. It would be a legal way to strip someone of their autonomy entirely. "There's something else," Mike continued, pulling out another set of photos. "Your husband isn't just watching you. He's been meeting with other people." The new photos showed Damon in conversation with a man I didn't recognize. They were sitting in a restaurant, papers spread between them on the table. "Who is that?" "A lawyer who specializes in elder law, specifically competency hearings and conservatorship cases." My hands started shaking. "How long has this been going on?" "The meetings with the lawyer started 3 months ago. But Mrs. Holloway, I think this has been building for much longer than 6 months." Mike was right. As I sat there in that coffee shop, memories began flooding back with horrible clarity. The way Damon had gradually taken over our finances over the past 2 years, insisting it would be easier if he handled everything. How he'd started answering my phone calls when I wasn't quick enough to reach it, always with some excuse about why I couldn't talk at the moment. The way he'd begun speaking for me in social situations, cutting me off mid-sentence to correct what I was saying. I thought about my friend Barbara, who'd stopped calling about a year ago. At the time, Damon had told me she'd said I seemed confused during their last conversation, that maybe I needed some space. I'd been hurt, but I'd trusted his version of events. Now I wondered what he'd actually said to her. "Mrs. Holloway?" Mike's voice pulled me back to the present. "Are you all right?" "I need to ask you something," I said. Has he been moving things in my house? Small things? Making me think I misplaced them?" Mike's expression grew grim. "I don't have direct evidence of that, but it would fit the pattern. It's called gaslighting. Making someone doubt their own perceptions and memories." I thought about the prescription bottle I'd found in the wrong cabinet last week, the grocery list that had disappeared from the refrigerator, the book I was certain I'd left on my nightstand that turned up on a shelf in the living room. Each incident small enough to dismiss, but together they'd been slowly eroding my confidence in my own mind. What do I do? The question came out like a plea. First, you document everything. Every conversation, every strange incident, every time something doesn't feel right. Second, you secure your finances. Check your accounts. Make sure you still have access to everything. And third, Mike paused. You need to be very careful. Men who go to these lengths to control their wives don't usually handle being discovered well. He slid a business card across the table. That's a friend of mine. She's a private investigator who specializes in domestic surveillance cases. If you need help gathering evidence or ensuring your safety, call her. After Mike left, I sat alone in that Starbucks for another hour, staring at the photos and documents spread before me. My husband of 37 years, the man who'd helped raise my daughter, who'd held my hand through my mother's funeral, who'd promised to love and protect me until death do us part, had been systematically working to steal my independence. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, as crushing as that was. The worst part was realizing how close he'd come to succeeding. I'd started to doubt myself, started to wonder if I was losing my mind. If Mike hadn't come forward, how much longer before I would have accepted Damon's narrative? How much longer before I would have voluntarily given up control of my own life? I drove back to Emma's apartment with a strange mix of fury and clarity burning in my chest. For the first time in months, maybe years, my mind felt completely clear. I wasn't confused. I wasn't forgetful. I wasn't incompetent. I was angry. That evening, I helped Emma cook dinner. And for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt truly present. She noticed the change immediately. You seem better today, Mom. More like yourself. I smiled at her, really smiled, probably for the first time in months. I feel like myself again. But as we cleaned up after dinner, my phone buzzed with a text from Damon. Haven't heard from you today. Everything okay? Call me. I stared at the message, and suddenly everything clicked into place. He'd been tracking me, so he knew I'd been in Portland all day. But the GPS device was now attached to a police car, probably driving all over Cedar Falls. He had no idea where I actually was, and it was making him nervous. I typed back, having a wonderful time with Emma. Talk tomorrow. His response came immediately. Miss you. Drive carefully when you head home. I read the message twice, looking for the subtext I now knew was always there. The barely concealed command, the reminder that he was watching, that he expected compliance. But I wasn't the same woman who'd left Cedar Falls 2 days ago. I'd found out the truth about my marriage, and I was going to do something about it. I just needed to be smarter than he was. And after 37 years of underestimating me, I had a feeling that wouldn't be too difficult. The next morning, as I prepared to drive home, Emma hugged me goodbye at her door. I'm so glad you came, Mom. You should visit more often. I think I will, I said, meaning it. Because now I understood that this trip hadn't just been a visit to my daughter. It had been the first step toward getting my life back. The drive home was the longest 6 hours of my life, not because of traffic or weather, but because I was returning to a house where nothing would ever be the same. I'd discovered that my husband was my enemy, and he had no idea that I knew. As I pulled into our driveway on Riverside Drive, I saw Damon waiting for me on the front porch, his expression unreadable. For just a moment, my resolve wavered. This was the man I'd loved for nearly 4 decades, the man who'd been my partner through every major milestone of my adult life. But then I remembered the photos, the lawyer meetings, the systematic campaign to make me doubt my own mind, and I knew there was no going back. How was Emma? He asked as I gathered my bags from the trunk. She's doing well, I replied, keeping my voice neutral. It was good to see her. As we walked into the house together, I found myself looking at everything with new eyes. Was there a camera hidden in the living room? Had he gone through my belongings while I was gone? Was my computer monitored, my phone tapped? I realized that I was living in enemy territory, and I was completely alone. Or at least, that's what Damon thought. But I had something he didn't know about. I had allies now, people who knew the truth about what he was doing, and I was going to use that knowledge to turn the tables on him. Because if he wanted to play games with my life, I was going to show him that two could play at that game. I found 3 more devices hidden in places I'd never think to look. I found the first additional device that very night, hidden inside the lamp on my bedside table. It was so small I almost missed it. A tiny black disc no bigger than a button, tucked behind the bulb socket where only someone looking specifically would ever find it. The second one was in the kitchen, attached to the underside of the microwave. The third was in my car's glove compartment, disguised as part of the latch mechanism. Each discovery made my hands shake more, made my breathing more shallow. This wasn't just surveillance. This was a complete invasion of every private space in my life. I sat on my bed at 2 a.m, 3 tiny devices lined up on my nightstand, trying to comprehend the scope of what Damon had done. How long had he been listening to my phone calls? Recording my conversations with Emma? Monitoring what I watched on television, what I cooked for dinner, what time I went to bed? The man sleeping next to me, the same bed we'd shared for 37 years, was a stranger. Worse than a stranger. He was my captor, and I'd never even known I was imprisoned. I barely slept that night, every small sound making me wonder if there were cameras too. Was he watching me even now? I pulled the covers up to my chin and stared at the ceiling, feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life. The next morning, Damon was unusually chatty over breakfast. "Sleep well, honey? You seemed restless." I looked at him across our kitchen table, this man with kind brown eyes and weathered hands who'd helped me plant our garden and fix our leaky faucet and hold me when I cried after my mother's funeral. Had he been studying my sleep patterns? Making notes about my restlessness for his file on my supposed mental decline? "I'm fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Just had a lot on my mind." "About what?" The question came too quickly, too eagerly. I shrugged. "Nothing important. Emma and I were talking about her job situation." It was a lie, and we both knew it. But I watched something shift in Damon's expression, a flicker of frustration that he couldn't access the real conversation I'd had with my daughter. My phone rang while I was cleaning up the breakfast dishes. The caller ID showed the Cedar Falls Police Department. "Mrs. Holloway, this is Detective Sarah Martinez. I wonder if we could talk. We've had some unusual activity on one of our patrol vehicles, and your name came up in our investigation." Damon looked up sharply from his newspaper. I could feel his eyes on me as I answered. "I'm not sure what you mean, Detective. Would you be able to come down to the station this morning? Say, around 10 o'clock? It shouldn't take long." After I hung up, Damon set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "What was that about?" "I have no idea," I said truthfully. "They want to talk to me about something involving a patrol car." I watched his face carefully, looking for any sign that he knew about the GPS tracker I'd moved. But his expression remained neutral, just the right amount of concerned curiosity. "Do you want me to come with you?" he asked. "No, I'm sure it's nothing important. Probably just a case of mistaken identity." At the police station, Detective Martinez turned out to be a woman about my daughter's age, with short dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. She led me to a small conference room and closed the door. "Mrs. Holloway, we found a GPS tracking device attached to one of our patrol cars 2 days ago. When we traced it, it led us to your husband." I blinked, trying to look surprised. "I don't understand." "The device was registered to a surveillance company that your husband has been paying for 6 months. We also discovered that he's been in contact with our department, asking about your driving record and whether we've had any reports of erratic behavior." My blood ran cold. "What kind of reports?" "He claimed you'd been driving strangely, getting lost, forgetting where you parked. He wanted to know if we thought you should still have a license." The systematic nature of it was breathtaking. Damon hadn't just been building a case for my incompetence. He'd been trying to get official support from law enforcement. Detective Martinez leaned forward. "Mrs. Holloway, I need to ask you directly. Did you know your husband had placed tracking devices on your vehicle?" I made a split-second decision. If I was going to get out of this situation, I needed allies, and the police were about as official as allies got. I found one yesterday, I admitted. I moved it to your patrol car because I was scared and didn't know what else to do. She nodded slowly. Have you found others? I told her about the devices in my house, about Mike Chen and what he'd revealed about the surveillance. With each detail, Detective Martinez's expression grew more serious. Mrs. Holloway, what your husband is doing isn't just morally wrong. Some of it may be illegal. Installing surveillance equipment in someone's home without their knowledge, tampering with their vehicle, falsely reporting someone to law enforcement. These could be criminal charges. But he's my husband, I said weakly. Don't spouses have certain rights? Not like this. Even spouses need consent for this level of surveillance. And if he's doing this to build a false case for your incompetency, that could constitute fraud and harassment. She handed me a card. I'm going to recommend that you speak with a domestic relations attorney immediately. In the meantime, we're going to have a conversation with your husband about the proper procedures for reporting traffic safety concerns. Driving home from the police station, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. For the first time, someone in authority had listened to me and believed me. Someone had confirmed that what was happening to me was wrong, possibly even criminal. But as I pulled into my driveway, I saw Damon waiting on the porch again, and my hope turned to dread. Something in his posture was different, tenser, more alert. How did it go? He asked as I walked up the steps. Fine. It was just about a fender bender someone reported. They had the wrong person. Damon nodded, but his eyes were studying my face with an intensity that made my skin crawl. That's good. I was worried it might be something serious. We went inside together and I busied myself with household chores while Damon retreated to his office. But something felt different in the house. Wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it until I realized what it was. Silence. For months, there had been a subtle background awareness of being watched, listened to. Now, suddenly, that feeling was gone. I went to check the lamp in our bedroom. The device was gone. The microwave in the kitchen, also gone. He'd removed them all while I was at the police station. My heart pounded as I realized what this meant. Damon knew that I knew. The game had changed entirely. I was making dinner when my phone rang. Emma's name appeared on the screen. Hi, Mom. Her voice sounded strange, strained. Emma? What's wrong? Mom, I need to tell you something, and I need you to not be angry with me. Something in her tone made my blood freeze. What is it, sweetheart? I hired that private investigator, Mike Chen. I hired him to watch Damon. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? I've been worried about you for months. Every time we talk, you sound more confused, more uncertain. And Damon always seems to know things about our conversations that he shouldn't know. I thought maybe he was. I don't know, hurting you somehow. So I hired Mike to find out what was really going on. I sank into a kitchen chair, my legs suddenly too weak to support me. Emma. I told Mike to present himself as working for Damon to see if he could get information that way. I never expected him to actually discover that Damon had hired his own investigator. Mom, when Mike found out what was really happening, he was as shocked as I was. The room spun around me. My own daughter had been spying on my husband, who was spying on me. The layers of deception were making me dizzy. Are you angry? Emma asked quietly. I looked toward Damon's office where I could hear him on the phone, his voice low and urgent. No, sweetheart. I'm not angry. I'm grateful. Mom, there's something else. Mike thinks Damon might escalate now that he knows you're aware of the surveillance. You need to be careful. As if summoned by her words, Damon appeared in the kitchen doorway. Who are you talking to? I looked at my husband, this man I'd loved and trusted for nearly 4 decades, and saw a stranger looking back at me. His eyes were cold, calculating. The mask he'd been wearing was finally slipping. Emma, I said simply. Tell her I said hello. His tone was pleasant, but there was something underneath it that made my skin crawl. And ask her when she's planning to visit again. After I hung up, Damon sat down across from me at the kitchen table. We looked at each other in silence for a long moment, and I realized we both knew the pretense was over. "Marianne," he said finally, his voice soft but somehow menacing. "We need to talk." The person who hired him wasn't who I expected. "We need to talk," Damon repeated, his voice carrying a weight I'd never heard before. I stayed seated at the kitchen table, my hands folded in my lap to keep them from shaking. "About what?" "About the fact that you've been lying to me." He leaned back in his chair, studying me with those cold eyes. "The police called me this afternoon, Marianne. They wanted to discuss my concerns about your driving. Imagine my surprise when I learned that you'd been the one to report finding a tracking device." My mouth went dry. "I don't know what you're talking about." Damon laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Please, we're past that now. You found the GPS tracker, moved it to that police car, and then played innocent. Very clever. I have to admit, I underestimated you." The admission hung between us like a blade. He'd just confirmed everything: the surveillance, the manipulation, the systematic campaign to control my life. "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. "Why what? Why did I want to keep track of my wife? Why did I want to make sure you were safe? Why did you try to make me think I was losing my mind?" For a moment, something that might have been regret flashed across his features, but it was gone so quickly I might have imagined it. "You weren't supposed to find out," he said quietly. If you'd just gone along with things, it would have been easier for everyone." "Easier for you, you mean?" Damon stood up and walked to the kitchen window, looking out at our backyard where we'd spent so many peaceful evenings together. When he spoke again, his voice was different. Tired, almost defeated. "Do you know how much debt I'm in, Marianne?" The question caught me off guard. "Debt?" $61,000. Casino debts, personal loans, credit cards I took out without telling you. I've been robbing Peter to pay Paul for 2 years now, and the wolves are at the door. I felt the blood drain from my face. $61,000? How is that possible? It started small. A few hundred here and there, online poker to blow off steam after retirement. But it grew. It always grows. He turned back to me, and for the first time in months, I saw the man I'd married instead of the stranger he'd become. "I needed access to your pension, your social security, the savings account your mother left you. But you're too sharp, too independent. You would have noticed if I'd just started helping myself." The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place with sickening clarity. "So you decided to have me declared incompetent. It wasn't supposed to hurt you," he said quickly. "A conservatorship would have just meant I could manage our finances together, make sure the bills got paid, keep us from losing the house. Our house isn't at risk, Damon. We own it free and clear. We will be if I can't pay back what I owe. These aren't the kind of people who accept payment plans." I stared at my husband, this man who'd been my partner for 37 years, and realized I was looking at a complete stranger. "So you decided to drive me insane instead?" "I never wanted to hurt you," he repeated, but the words sounded hollow. I needed you to need me, to depend on me completely. If the court appointed me as your guardian, I could access all our assets legally. I could fix this mess without you ever having to know about it. By stealing my freedom, by making me doubt my own mind. Damon's phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it and his face went pale. "They want the payment by Friday, or they're coming to the house." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Who's coming to the house?" Before he could answer, the doorbell rang. We looked at each other, both frozen, as if whatever was on the other side of that door might be the answer to his question. Damon walked to the front window and peered through the curtains. "It's Emma." My heart clenched. My daughter was here, and she was walking into a situation she couldn't possibly understand. I heard her key in the lock. She'd kept a key to our house since she was a teenager. And then her voice calling out, "Mom? Dad? Are you home?" Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway, her overnight bag slung over her shoulder. She looked from me to Damon, immediately sensing the tension in the room. I decided to surprise you with a visit, she said carefully. I hope that's okay. Of course it is, sweetheart, I said, standing to hug her. But over her shoulder, I could see Damon watching us with an expression I couldn't read. Actually, Emma, your timing is perfect, Damon said. Your mother and I were just discussing some family matters that you should probably be aware of. Emma's body tensed in my arms. She pulled back to look at me, her eyes full of concern. Mom? Emma? Damon continued, his voice taking on that smooth, patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. I think you've noticed that your mother has been having some memory issues lately, some confusion about daily tasks. Damon, don't, I warned. But he kept talking, as if I hadn't spoken. I've been documenting these episodes because I'm concerned about her ability to make important decisions, financial decisions, medical decisions. I think she needs more support than she's willing to admit. Emma looked back and forth between us, her confusion evident. What kind of memory issues? Nothing significant, I said quickly. Nothing at all, actually. Marianne has been forgetting appointments, misplacing important documents, getting confused about conversations we've had, Damon said, his voice full of false concern. Yesterday, she told the police that she'd found a tracking device on her car. Of course, there was no such device. I'm worried that she might be having paranoid thoughts. I watched in horror as Emma's expression shifted. She was actually considering what he was saying. My own daughter was starting to believe that I was mentally incompetent. Mom, Emma said gently, is that true? Did you think someone was tracking you? Someone was tracking me, I said firmly. Your stepfather hired a private investigator to follow me for 6 months. Damon shook his head sadly. This is what I'm talking about. These elaborate stories, these accusations. It's classic early-stage dementia behavior. Stop it, I snapped, my patience finally breaking. Stop lying to her. But Emma was looking at me with the same expression I'd seen on doctors' faces when they were trying to gentle with a confused elderly patient. Pitying. Concerned. Convinced that I was the problem. Emma, I said desperately, call Mike Chen, the private investigator you hired. He'll tell you the truth. What private investigator? Damon asked, his voice sharp. Emma's face went white. Mom, I never hired anyone. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. What? I don't know who Mike Chen is. Mom, I'm worried about you. I stared at my daughter, my mind reeling. But you called me. You told me you hired him to watch Damon. Emma shook her head slowly. I never called you about that. I never hired anyone. The room seemed to tilt around me. If Emma hadn't hired Mike Chen, then who had? And why had he told me she did? Sweetheart, Damon said to Emma, his voice gentle and concerned. This is exactly what I've been trying to tell you. Your mother is having episodes where she believes things that aren't real. I looked at my daughter's face and saw doubt creeping in. After everything that had happened, after all the evidence I'd uncovered, she was starting to believe him over me. Emma, please, I said, my voice breaking. You have to believe me. He's been spying on me, manipulating me, trying to drive me crazy so he can take control of our finances. But even as I said the words, I could hear how they sounded. Paranoid, delusional, exactly like the ravings of someone suffering from dementia. Damon put his arm around Emma's shoulders. I think we need to make an appointment with Dr. Harrison. Get your mother properly evaluated. No, I said quickly. I don't need to be evaluated. I need you to tell the truth. The truth is that I love you, Marianne, Damon said, his voice full of false warmth. And I'm going to take care of you no matter how bad this gets. I looked at Emma, my only child, the person who was supposed to protect me when I couldn't protect myself, and realized with growing horror that she was going to let him do it. She was going to let him take control of my life because she believed I was losing my mind. And suddenly, I understood the brilliance of what he'd done. It wasn't enough to spy on me and document my supposed incompetence. He'd needed to isolate me from anyone who might support me. He'd needed to turn my own family against me. "Emma," I said one last time, "please believe me." But the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. My own daughter had been part of this all along. That night, I lay awake in the guest room. Emma had insisted I sleep separately from Damon until we could get things sorted out, staring at the ceiling and trying to make sense of what had happened. My own daughter believed I was losing my mind. The one person I'd thought I could count on had turned against me. But something about the Mike Chen situation didn't add up. Emma had denied hiring him, but the details he'd given me were too specific, too accurate to be fabricated. Someone had hired him to watch Damon, and it wasn't me. At 3 a.m, I crept downstairs to the kitchen and called the number on Mike Chen's business card. "Mrs. Holloway?" His voice was alert despite the hour. "Are you safe? I need to know who really hired you," I whispered into the phone. "Emma says she never contacted you." There was a long pause. "Mrs. Holloway, I need to see you in person. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? Same Starbucks, 8 o'clock? I don't know if I can get away. They're watching me now. Try, this is important. And Mrs. Holloway, trust your instincts. You're not losing your mind." The next morning, Emma offered to drive me to my doctor's appointment, an appointment that Damon had apparently already scheduled with Dr. Harrison for a cognitive evaluation. I agreed, but asked if we could stop for coffee first. "I haven't been sleeping well," I told her as we pulled into the Starbucks parking lot. "I just need some caffeine before facing whatever Dr. Harrison is going to put me through." Emma looked uncomfortable. "Mom, the evaluation is just to help us understand what's going on. Nobody wants to take away your independence." I wanted to laugh at the irony, but instead I squeezed her hand. "I know you're trying to help, sweetheart. I'll just be a minute." Mike Chen was already waiting at our usual table. I slid into the seat across from him, my heart pounding. "Who hired you?" I asked without preamble. "Your mother-in-law," he said quietly. "Damon's mother, Dorothy Chen. She remarried after Damon's father died. She's been living in the assisted living facility on Maple Street for 3 years." I blinked in confusion. "Dorothy's still alive?" "But Damon told me she died 2 years ago." "Very much alive, and very concerned about her son's behavior. She's been watching him spiral with his gambling addiction, and she was worried about what he might do to you." My mind reeled. Dorothy Chen had been like a second mother to me for 37 years. She'd helped me through Emma's difficult teenage years, been there when my own mother was dying. Damon had told me she'd passed away peacefully in her sleep, and I'd grieved for her. I'd even wanted to attend the funeral, but he'd said it was family only, too painful for me to handle. "She's been trying to contact you for months," Mike continued. "But every time she calls your house, Damon intercepts. He told the staff at Sunset Manor that you were having mental health issues and that contact with you would be too stressful for his mother." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The phone calls that had been wrong numbers or telemarketers that Damon always answered. The mail that had been misdirected or not important enough to bother me with. Dorothy hired me to document Damon's activities so she could build a case to have his access to her estate revoked, Mike explained. "She's worth quite a bit of money, and she was afraid he was planning to manipulate her the same way he was manipulating you." "But how did you know about Emma?" Mike looked uncomfortable. "I didn't initially. When I discovered the extent of Damon's surveillance of you, I did some digging on your family. I found out Emma had been making inquiries about elder abuse resources online, searching for information about financial exploitation of seniors. I made an educated guess that she might be concerned about your welfare." I felt tears stinging my eyes. Emma had been worried about me. She'd been researching how to help me, not how to have me declared incompetent. "So when you told me Emma had hired you, I was trying to give you hope. I thought knowing that your daughter was concerned would help you feel less alone. I'm sorry for lying, but at the time, it seemed like a kindness." Through the window, I could see Emma in the car, checking her watch anxiously. I needed to get back before she came looking for me. Mike, I need proof. Something I can show Emma that will make her believe me. He slid a thick envelope across the table. Bank records showing Damon's gambling debts, copies of his communications with the surveillance company, photos of him meeting with the elder law attorney. And most importantly, a notarized statement from Dorothy explaining everything. I clutched the envelope like a lifeline. Will Dorothy see me? She's been hoping you'd come. Room 212 at Sunset Manor. But be careful. Damon can't know you've been there. I hurried back to the car, the envelope hidden in my purse. Emma looked at me with concern. You look upset. Did something happen? Just nervous about the appointment, I lied. But as we drove toward Dr. Harrison's office, I was formulating a plan. Emma, I said carefully, before we go to the doctor, there's someone I need to see. Someone who can explain everything that's been happening. Mom, we don't have time. Please, just 20 minutes. If what this person tells you doesn't make sense, we'll go straight to Dr. Harrison and I'll submit to whatever evaluation he thinks is necessary. Emma hesitated, then pulled into a gas station parking lot. Who is it? Dorothy Chen, Damon's mother. Mom, Dorothy died 2 years ago. We've talked about this. I pulled out Mike Chen's envelope and handed her the notarized letter. Read this. I watched Emma's face as she read Dorothy's statement, saw the confusion turn to shock, then to something that looked like fury. This can't be real, she whispered. Call Sunset Manor. Ask them if Dorothy Chen is a resident. With trembling fingers, Emma dialed the number on the letterhead. I listened to her half of the conversation, watched her expression change from skepticism to horror. They're transferring me to her room, Emma said, her voice barely audible. A moment later, I heard a familiar voice coming through the phone speaker. Emma, sweetheart, is that you? Oh my goodness, I've been trying to reach you for so long. Emma's eyes filled with tears. Grandma Dorothy? But Dad said. He said you were. Dead, I know. He told the staff here the same thing about you and your mother. He said you'd moved away and didn't want to be bothered with an old woman. But I knew something was wrong when you stopped visiting, stopped calling. 20 minutes later, we were sitting in Dorothy's sunny room at Sunset Manor, the truth finally spilling out. Dorothy, now 83 but sharp as ever, held my hands while she explained how she'd discovered Damon's gambling addiction, how she'd hired Mike Chen, how she'd been trying desperately to warn me. I knew my son had problems, she said, her voice heavy with regret. But I never thought he would try to hurt you, Marianne. When Mike showed me what Damon was doing, the surveillance, the gaslighting, the plan to have you declared incompetent, I was horrified. Emma sat in stunned silence, still processing the magnitude of what we'd learned. There's more, Dorothy continued gently. Damon forged my signature on several documents, transferring money from my accounts to pay his gambling debts. That's actually how I first discovered what was going on. The bank called to verify a large withdrawal that I never authorized. I looked at Emma, saw the moment when everything clicked into place for her. The doubt in her eyes was gone, replaced by a fierce protective anger I'd never seen before. How could he do this? Emma whispered. How could he lie to us for so long? Addiction makes people do terrible things, Dorothy said sadly. But that doesn't excuse what he's done to you, Marianne, or to Emma, or to me. What do we do now? I asked. Dorothy squeezed my hands. Now we stop him. I've already contacted my attorney about the forged documents, and Mike has enough evidence of Damon's surveillance activities to file criminal charges. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe. Emma stood up abruptly. We're going home, right now, and we're going to confront him with everything we know. Emma, no, I said quickly. If we corner him, if he feels trapped, there's no telling what he might do. Mike said he owed money to dangerous people. But Emma's jaw was set with determination. Mom, you've been living in fear for months. We're not going to let him manipulate and gaslight you for one more day. As we drove back to the house on Riverside Drive, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: the complete support of my family. Emma believed me. Dorothy believed me. I wasn't alone anymore. But I also felt a growing sense of dread. Damon had spent months building his case against me, isolating me from everyone who might help. When he discovered that his carefully constructed web of lies was unraveling, when he realized that Emma was now on my side, what would he do? The garage door was open when we pulled into the driveway. Damon's car was gone. "Where is he?" Emma asked as we walked into the empty house. I found the note on the kitchen table, written in Damon's familiar handwriting. "Gone to handle some business. Back tonight. Don't wait up." Emma read over my shoulder. "What kind of business?" I thought about his phone calls, his mounting desperation, the $61,000 he owed to people who weren't known for their patience. "The kind that means he's not planning to come back," I said quietly. Everything I thought I knew about my life was a carefully constructed lie. Damon didn't come home that night, or the next. By the third day, Emma had moved into the guest room, and Dorothy had convinced her facility to let her stay with us temporarily. For the first time in months, our house felt like a home again, instead of a prison. On Thursday morning, Detective Martinez called with news. "Mrs. Holloway, we've issued a warrant for your husband's arrest. The bank fraud charges alone will put him away for several years. But there's something else you need to know. We found him." I gripped the phone tighter. "Where is he?" "Las Vegas. He was arrested trying to board a plane to Mexico with $53,000 in cash and a fake passport. It appears he liquidated several of your joint accounts before he fled." My legs went weak, and I sank into a kitchen chair. Emma, who had been listening to my half of the conversation, immediately came to stand beside me. "How much did he take?" I asked. "Approximately $87,000 from your savings accounts." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Holloway, but the good news is that most of it is recoverable since the banks have records of the fraudulent transactions." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen, really my kitchen now, not his, and tried to process what I was feeling. Relief, certainly. Anger, absolutely. But underneath it all was something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. "Mom?" Emma sat down beside me. "How are you doing?" I looked at my daughter, this strong, intelligent woman who had fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself, and smiled. "I'm free." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, paperwork, and slowly reclaiming my life. The surveillance equipment had been more extensive than even I had realized. Cameras in the living room and kitchen, recording devices in my car, software on my computer that tracked every website I visited and every email I sent. Mike Chen walked me through the evidence he'd collected, and I was amazed at the scope of Damon's operation. He'd been documenting my every move for over a year, creating a detailed profile of my daily activities, my relationships, my habits. He'd even been recording my conversations with my doctor, looking for any sign of confusion or memory problems he could exploit. "The scary thing is how close he came to succeeding," Mike told me as we sat in a lawyer's office going through the files. "If he'd been just a little more patient, a little more subtle, he might have convinced everyone that you needed a guardian." Dorothy, who had recovered completely from her grief over being declared dead by her son, squeezed my hand. "But he underestimated you, dear, and he certainly underestimated how much people love you." The love part had been the biggest revelation of all. In the weeks following Damon's arrest, people came out of the woodwork to support me. My neighbor Betty Morrison, who I'd barely spoken to in recent years, brought me casseroles and offered to help with yard work. My book club, which I'd been missing regularly because of Damon's concerns about my evening driving, welcomed me back with open arms. Even Dr. Harrison, who Damon had been setting up to evaluate my competency, called to apologize for nearly falling for the manipulation. "Your husband was very convincing," Dr. Harrison admitted when I went to see him. He had documentation, specific examples, a whole narrative about your declining mental state. If you hadn't been able to provide counter-evidence, I might have recommended a competency evaluation. The thought was chilling, but it was also empowering. I'd been strong enough to recognize what was happening to me. I'd been smart enough to fight back. I'd survived. Emma took a leave of absence from her job in Portland to help me sort through everything. And during those weeks, we became closer than we'd been since she was a child. She helped me change all the locks, close the joint accounts Damon had access to, and most importantly, just be present while I processed the enormity of what had happened. "I should have seen it," she said one evening as we were going through old photo albums, trying to identify the exact moment when Damon had started his campaign of control. I should have noticed that something was wrong. I looked at a picture of the three of us from Emma's college graduation, Damon with his arm around my shoulders, both of us beaming with pride at our daughter. He'd seemed like such a devoted husband and stepfather then. The deception had been that complete. "He fooled me for months," I said. "How could you have seen it from 300 miles away?" "Because I'm your daughter. I'm supposed to protect you." I set down the photo album and took Emma's hands in mine. "Sweetheart, you did protect me. When it mattered most, you believed me. You chose to trust me over him, even when it was difficult. That's what saved me." 3 months after Damon's arrest, I was sitting in my lawyer's office signing the final divorce papers when she handed me an envelope. "This came for you yesterday," she said. "It's from your husband." I stared at the envelope, postmarked from the county jail. Part of me wanted to throw it away unopened, but a larger part needed to know what he had to say. The letter was shorter than I'd expected. "Mary Ann, I know you'll never forgive me, and I don't expect you to. I just wanted you to know that I never meant for it to go as far as it did. When the gambling started, I told myself I could control it, could fix everything without you ever knowing. When I couldn't, I convinced myself that taking control of our finances was protecting you, not hurting you. I was wrong about everything. You were never the problem. I was. You were never confused or incompetent. I was desperate and weak. You deserved a husband who protected you from the world, not one who became the very thing you needed protection from. I hope someday you can rebuild the life I tried to steal from you. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for. Damon." I folded the letter and put it back in the envelope. It wasn't an apology, not really, but it was an admission, and that was something. That evening, Emma and I were having dinner on the back patio when she brought up something I'd been dreading. "Mom, I've been thinking about going back to Portland. My leave of absence is up next week, and I need to get back to work." I'd known this moment was coming, but it still made my stomach clench. "Of course you do. You can't put your life on hold indefinitely. But I don't want to leave you alone. Not yet." I looked around my backyard, at the garden I'd neglected for months but was slowly bringing back to life, at the house that was finally mine again, at the life I was rebuilding from scratch at 61 years old. "I won't be alone," I said. "I have Dorothy 3 blocks away. I have my book club. I have friends I'm reconnecting with. And I have myself back, which is the most important thing." Emma smiled, but I could see the worry in her eyes. "Promise me you'll call if you need anything. Anything at all." "I promise. But Emma, I need you to promise me something too." "What?" "Promise me you'll stop feeling guilty about not seeing what was happening sooner. You couldn't have prevented this, and you couldn't have fixed it any faster than you did. You saved me at exactly the right moment, in exactly the right way." A year later, I was standing in the same Starbucks where I'd first learned the truth about my marriage, but this time I was there by choice. Emma was visiting for the weekend, and we'd decided to meet Dorothy and Mike Chen for coffee to celebrate the anniversary of what we'd started calling Freedom Day. "So what's next?" Mike asked as we sat around a table filled with the remnants of celebration cupcakes Dorothy had insisted on bringing. I thought about the question seriously. For 43 years of my adult life, my identity had been defined by being someone's wife or someone's mother. For the past year, I'd been learning how to be just Marianne, not Marianne Holloway, not Emma's mother, not even Damon's victim. Just me. I'm thinking about volunteering, I said. There's an organization that helps seniors who are being financially exploited. They need people who understand what it's like to be manipulated by someone you trust. Dorothy nodded approvingly. Use your experience to help others. I like that. And, I added, surprising myself with the words, I'm thinking about traveling. I've never been anywhere by myself, never made a decision about where to go or what to see without considering someone else's preferences. Emma grinned. Where do you want to go? I thought about all the places I'd dreamed of seeing but had never suggested because Damon wasn't interested, or because the money would be better spent on something more practical, or because someone my age shouldn't be traipsing around the world alone. Everywhere, I said, and I meant it. As we walked out of the coffee shop together, I caught my reflection in the glass door. The woman looking back at me was someone I was still getting to know, grayer than she used to be, with lines around her eyes that spoke of hard-won wisdom, but with a straightness to her spine that hadn't been there in years. She was 62 years old, recently divorced, living alone for the first time in her adult life. By society's standards, her life should have been winding down, her adventures behind her. But as I walked to my car, with no tracking devices, no surveillance, no one monitoring my every move, I realized that my real life was just beginning. I'd spent decades believing that love meant surrender, that marriage required me to shrink myself to fit someone else's vision of who I should be. I'd learned the difference between being cherished and being controlled, between being protected and being imprisoned. The woman who had discovered that GPS tracker 15 months ago had been afraid, isolated, doubting her own mind. The woman driving home now was none of those things. I pulled into my driveway on Riverside Drive, my driveway, my house, my choice of whether to come or go, and sat for a moment in the gathering dusk. Tomorrow I would call the travel agency and book that trip to Ireland I'd always wanted to take. Next week I would start volunteering with the Elder Advocacy Group. Next month I would have Dorothy over for Christmas dinner, and Emma would join us, and we would create new traditions that had nothing to do with the past. For the first time in my adult life, the future was entirely mine to choose. And that was the most beautiful gift I could have given myself. I was finally, completely, absolutely free. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.